When Officer Cordelia Blackwood disappeared on her night patrol, the only clue was her crashed police car at the bottom of Devil's Tooth Cliff. Her body was never found. For 13 years, her sister Maple never stopped searching. Then, in 1990, a massive storm ripped open the cliff face, revealing a hidden cave. Inside, investigators found Cordelia's badge and something much worse, evidence that 14 other people had been imprisoned there over 30 years. But the most chilling discovery was carved fresh into the cave wall. MB 1990, Maple's initials, made just months before. Who had been secretly hunting people in this quiet town for decades? And why was the missing officer's sister marked as the next target? October 15, 1977, Moonrise Bay, California officer Cordelia Blackwood pulled her patrol car to the side of Highway 1 and checked her watch. 11:47 p.m. The numbers glowed green in the darkness. She had been driving this summer route for 3 years. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the fog seemed thicker. The ocean waves sounded angrier. Cora, as everyone called her, was 28 years old and the only female police officer in Moonrise Bay. The small coastal town had only 12 officers total. Most of them thought a woman had no business wearing a badge. But Cora had proven them wrong, one call at a time. She rolled down her window and breathed in the salty air. The radio crackled with static. Then Chief Holloway's voice cut through the night. Unit 7, we have a disturbance at Gull's Rest Diner on Pine Street. Can you respond? Cora picked up the radio. Unit 7 responding to Gull's Rest Diner. She had eaten lunch at Gull's Rest just yesterday. Mrs. Chen, the owner, made the best apple pie in town. Mrs. Chen was also one of the few people who never looked surprised to see a woman in uniform walk through her door. The drive to Pine Street took 5 minutes. Cora's headlights cut through the fog as she turned into the diner's parking lot. The neon sign that usually said, "Open 24 hours," was dark. That was strange. Mrs. Chen never closed early. Cora parked and grabbed her flashlight. The diner's front door was unlocked, which rang alarm bells in her head. Mrs. Chen always locked up when she stepped away, even for a minute. "Mrs. Chen?" Cora called as she pushed open the door. The bell above it jingled softly. Inside, the diner looked wrong. 3 chairs were knocked over near the counter. A coffee cup sat on table 4, still warm when Cora touched it. Steam rose from the black liquid like tiny ghosts. But Mrs. Chen was nowhere to be found. Cora checked the kitchen, the storage room, even the small office behind the cash register. Nothing. No signs of a struggle except for those overturned chairs. No blood, no broken dishes, no indication of where Mrs. Chen might have gone. She was about to call for backup when her radio crackled again. Unit 7, we have reports of strange lights near Devil's Tooth Cliff. Multiple callers. Can you check it? Out. Devil's Tooth Cliff? Cora knew it well. The jagged rock formation jutted out over the ocean like Agent's broken tooth. Local teenagers liked to dare each other to climb it. Cora had pulled 3 kids off those rocks this year alone, all of them half scared to death and promising never to go back. But they always went back. Something about the cliff drew people to it, especially young people looking for thrills. Unit 7 responding to Devil's Tooth Cliff, she radioed back. The drive took 10 minutes along the winding coastal road. Fog rolled in from the ocean, making her headlights almost useless. Cora drove slowly, carefully, watching for deer or drunk drivers, or any of the dozen things that could go wrong on a night like this. When she reached the cliff area, she parked on the shoulder and stepped out of her car. The ocean roared below, invisible in the darkness. Waves crashed against rocks with a sound like thunder. Cora turned on her flashlight and swept it across the ground. The beam caught something that made her heart skip. Fresh tire tracks in the soft earth, leading toward the cliff's edge. She followed. The tracks, stepping carefully. The ground near the cliff was unstable, prone to sudden drops and hidden holes. One wrong step could send a person tumbling down to Therox below. The tire tracks ended abruptly at the cliff's edge. Cora knelt down and examined them more closely. They were wide tracks, probably from a truck or large car. And they were fresh, made within the last few hours, she guessed. She stood up and played her flashlight beam over the edge. 60 feet below, waves crashed against sharp rocks. If a vehicle had gone over this edge, it would be destroyed. And anyone inside? "This is Unit 7, she said into her radio. "I need backup at Devil's Tooth Cliff immediately. I have evidence of a possible vehicle accident." Static answered her. She tried again. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Do you copy?" More static. The radio was dead. Cora felt the first real stab of fear she'd experienced all night. Police radios didn't just die for no reason, and the combination of Mrs. Chen's empty diner and tire tracks leading to a cliff edge was starting to form a picture she didn't like. She walked back toward her patrol car, intending to drive back to town and report in person. Butas, she approached. The vehicle. She heard something that made her freeze. Footsteps. Heavy ones, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding on the rocky ground. Cora reached for her service weapon and turned toward the sound. Her flashlight beam caught a figure emerging from the fog about 20 feet away. "Police officer!" she called out. "Identify yourself!" The figure stopped, but didn't answer. In the weak beam of her flashlight, Cora could see it was Eamon, tall and thin, wearing dark clothes. His face was hidden in shadow. "I said identify yourself," Cora repeated, her hand steady on her gun. The man took a step forward, then another. "There's been an accident," he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly. "Someone went over the cliff. I saw it happen." "Where?" Cora asked, not lowering her weapon. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. "Down there." The man pointed toward the cliff edge. "About an hour ago. I was driving by and saw the headlights go over." "Did you call for help?" "My radio's not working," the man said. "Same as yours, I imagine." Cora's blood went cold. How did he know her radio wasn't working? "Step into the light," she ordered. "Hands where I can see them." Instead, the man took another step forward. Now she could see his face, weathered, with pale eyes that seemed to glow in the flashlight beam. "Officer Blackwood," he said, and her heart nearly stopped. She hadn't told him her name. "I know a lot about you, Cordelia. You live on Maple Street. Your sister works at the library in Portland. You write poetry in your spare time." Cora's mouth went dry. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a random encounter. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man smiled, and it was the coldest thing she'd ever seen. "I'm the one who's been watching you," he said simply. "Waiting for the right moment." "The right moment for what?" "To add you to my collection." Before Cora could react, she heard movement behind her. A second person, moving fast. She started to turn, but something hard struck the back of her head. The world exploded into stars and pain. Her flashlight flew from her hand, spinning away into the darkness. Her gun clattered on the rocks. As consciousness faded, the last thing Cora heard was the sound of waves crashing far below, and a voice saying, "Welcome to Devil's Tooth." "Cliff, Officer Blackwood. You're going to be here for a very long time." Then everything went black. October 16th, 1977, 6:23. AM Police Chief Marcus Holloway stood at Devil's Tooth Cliff, staring down at the wreckage below. The morning sun had burned away most of the fog, revealing what the darkness had hidden. 60 feet down, waves crashed over the twisted remains of Cora's patrol car. The black and white vehicle lay upside down on the rocks, its roof crushed flat. Salt water filled the broken windows with each wave. "How long has it been down there?" Asked Detective Ray Torres, Cora's partner and best friend on the force. Harbor Patrol spotted it at first light, Chief Holloway replied. His voice sounded older than his 52 years. They've been searching for 2 hours, no sign of her body. Ray couldn't take his eyes off the wreckage. He had ridden in that car with Cora hundreds of times. They had shared coffee, stories, and complaints about the job. Yesterday morning, she'd been laughing at his terrible jokes. Now, she wouldn't have driven off this cliff, Ray said firmly. Not Cora. She was the most careful driver I knew. Chief Holloway nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. The skid marks don't make sense either. Look at them. Ray examined the tire tracks leading to the cliff's edge. They were straight, with no signs of braking or swerving. It looked like someone had driven directly toward the drop-off at full speed. Maybe she had a heart attack, suggested Officer Jim Walsh, the youngest member of their small force, or fell asleep at the wheel. Cora was 28 and healthy. As a horse, Ray snapped. And she never fell asleep on duty. The Coast Guard cutter Moonrise moved slowly through the waters below, searching for any sign of Officer Cordelia Blackwood. Divers had already been down to examine the car. They found her radio, her hat, and one of her boots, but no body. Current's strong here, explained Captain Wade Finnegan, the old fisherman who had called in the wreck. If she went into the water, she could be miles out to sea by now. But Ray wasn't convinced. He had grown up in Moonrise Bay, swimming in these waters since he was 5 years old. He knew how the currents worked. Bodies that went into the water at Devil's Tooth Cliff usually washed up within a day or two, somewhere along the shoreline. We need to search the beaches, he told Chief Holloway. Both directions, at least 5 miles. Already started, the chief replied. I've got every available officer walking the sand, plus volunteers. The volunteers had begun arriving as soon as word spread through town. Mrs. Patterson from the bakery brought coffee and sandwiches for the searchers. The high school football team showed up still in their practice uniforms. Even some of the fishermen had docked their boats early to help look. Cora was popular in Moonrise Bay. She had a way of talking to people that made them feel heard and respected. When old Mr. Garcia's dog went missing, Cora spent her day off searching, until she found it. When teenage runaway Sally Chen got scared and lost, Cora drove her home and sat with her family while they worked things out. Officer Blackwood helped my daughter when she was getting bullied at school, Mrs. Rodriguez told Ray as he organized search teams. She made those kids understand that hurting others wasn't acceptable. My Maria loved her. By noon, they had covered every beach within 10 miles. Nothing. No sign of Cora anywhere. That's when her sister arrived. Maple Blackwood pulled up in her old blue Honda, dust covering the car from her 4-hour drive down from Portland. At 22, she looked like a younger version of Cora. Same dark hair, same determined chin, same green eyes that missed nothing. But where Cora was calm and steady, Maple burned with fierce energy. She jumped out of her car and marched straight to Chief Holloway. "Where is my sister?" she demanded. Chief Holloway explained what they knew, which wasn't much. Cora's last radio call had been at 11:52 p.m., reporting that she was responding to lights at Devil's Tooth Cliff. Her car was found crashed on the rocks below. No body had been recovered. "You're treating this like an accident," Maple said, her voice rising. But Cora didn't have accidents. She was careful about everything. Someone did this to her. "Now, Miss Blackwood," Chief Holloway began. But Maple cut him off. "Don't Miss Blackwood me. My sister called me 3 days ago. She said she felt like someone was watching her, following her. I told her to report it, but she said she needed proof first." Ray felt his stomach drop. "She never mentioned that to me." Cora didn't want to worry anyone unless she was sure, Maple explained. "But she was scared. Really scared. And my sister didn't scare easily. This changed everything. If Cora had been stalked, then her disappearance wasn't an accident. It was a crime. "Did she give you any details?" Ray asked. "Description of who might be watching her?" Maple shook her head. "Just that she'd noticed the same vehicle several times when she was off duty, and that she felt eyes on her even when she couldn't see. Anyone!" Chief Holloway immediately called the FBI. By evening, 2 federal agents had arrived from San Francisco. Agent Linda Morrison was a specialist in kidnapping cases. Agent Robert Kim focused on serial crimes. They set up a command post at the police station and began interviewing everyone who had contact with Cora in her final week. Jimmy Morse, the gas station attendant, remembered her stopping by on October 13th. "She seemed nervous," he told the agents. "Not like her usual self. She kept looking around while she pumped gas, like she expected someone to jump out at her." Mrs. Chen, when they finally found her wandering confused near the highway 3 miles from her diner, had no memory of the previous evening. She claimed she had gone home early and never saw Cora at all. But the warm coffee cup in her diner and the overturned chairs suggested something different had happened. The FBI brought in search dogs. They combed every inch of the cliff area, looking for any trace of where Cora might have gone. The dogs found her scent leading from her patrol car to the cliff's edge, then nothing. "It's like she vanished into thin air," Agent Morrison told Chief Holloway after the first week of searching, but Maple refused to accept that explanation. She took a leave of absence from her job at the Portland Library and rented a small apartment in Moonrise Bay. Every day, she walked the beaches, searched the forests, and knocked on doors asking if anyone had seen anything unusual. "My sister is out there somewhere," she told Ray one evening as they stood at Devil's Tooth Cliff. "And I'm not leaving until I find her." 3 weeks after Cora's disappearance, the FBI officially classified the case as a probable kidnapping. But with no ransom demands, no witnesses, and no clear suspects, the investigation stalled. Chief Holloway aged 10 years in those 3 weeks. He had hired Cora himself, fought the town council to give her a chance when they said a woman couldn't handle police work. She'd proven them all wrong, becoming one of his best officers. Now she was gone, and he had no answers for her family or his community. The media attention began to fade. Other cases demanded the FBI's attention. The search teams dwindled to just a few dedicated volunteers, but Ray never stopped looking. Every day after his regular shift, he drove the coastal roads, checking places they had already searched a dozen times. He interviewed and re-interviewed everyone who had any contact with Cora. And Maple never left Moonrise Bay. She got a job at the local library, organizing the same books and newspapers that might someday contain the clue that would bring her sister home. Every October 15th, on the anniversary of Cora's disappearance, Maple would drive to Devil's Tooth Cliff. She would place fresh flowers on the rocks and make the same promise. "I'll never stop looking for you, Cora. Never." The words would carry on the ocean wind, mixing with the crash of waves and the cry of seagulls. And somewhere in that sound, Maple always thought she could hear her sister's voice, telling her to keep searching, keep hoping, keep believing that the truth would surface someday. Like the tide that always returns to shore, bringing with it treasures hidden in the deep. 78, in 1990, 12 years passed like a slow, steady rain that never quite stops. Moonrise Bay changed in small ways. New shops opened, old ones closed, children grew up and moved away. But the shadow of Officer Cordelia Blackwood's disappearance never lifted from the town. Detective Ray Torres, now Chief Torres after Marcus Holloway's early retirement, walked with a slight limp. The injury had happened in 1982 while he was rappelling down the cliffs near Devil's Tooth, following up on what turned out to be another false lead. His left knee never healed quite right, but he refused to let it slow him down. Every morning, he stopped by Cora's old locker at the police station. Badge number 247 still hung on the metal door, exactly where she had left it on October 14, 1977. The other officers had suggested cleaning it out years ago, maybe reassigning the badge number to someone new. Torres always said no. She might come, back for it, he would tell them, even though he knew it sounded foolish. Deep down, Torres no longer believed Cora was alive, but he couldn't let go of her case. Every missing person report that crossed his desk reminded him of that October night. Every unsolved mystery felt personal. His hair had gone completely gray by age 45, and his wife often found him staring at case files long after midnight. "You can't save them all, Ray," she would tell him gently. "But I should have saved her," he always replied. Maple Blackwood had become as much a part of Moonrise Bay as the lighthouse itself. Now 35, she ran the local library with quiet efficiency. The small memorial corner she had created for Cora had grown over the years into something resembling a shrine. Newspaper clippings covered one wall, documenting not just Cora's case but similar disappearances from around the country. A guest book sat on a small table, its pages filled with messages from visitors who had heard the story. "Officer Blackwood saved my son from drowning in 1975, read one entry from 1985. "She was a true hero. Cora helped me when I was a runaway teenager," wrote another visitor. "She didn't arrest me. She bought me dinner and helped me call my parents. I became a teacher because of her kindness." Young police officers came through town regularly, wanting to hear about the case that had become legend in law enforcement circles. Maple would tell them Cora's story, showing them photographs and reading from the letters that still arrived each year from people who remembered her sister. "She believed in helping people, not just arresting them," Maple would explain. Cora thought a police officer's job was to make the community stronger, safer, more connected. Some visitors were less welcome. In 1985, a psychic from San Francisco arrived claiming that Cora's spirit had called to her. The woman, who called herself Madame Zelda, stood at Devil's Tooth Cliff for 3 hours, waving her arms and speaking in what she claimed was the language of the dead. "Officer Blackwood is trapped between worlds," Madame Zelda announced to the small crowd that had gathered. "She cannot rest until her killer is found and punished." Chief Torres escorted the psychic out of town personally, but her words stuck with him. Sometimes, on foggy nights when he patrolled the coastal road, he thought he saw a figure in a police uniform walking near the cliff's edge. When he stopped to investigate, no one was ever there. The lighthouse keeper, an odd man named Ezra Dorn who rarely came into town, reported similar sightings. "She's still walking her beat," he told Torres during one of their infrequent conversations. "Protecting the coast even in death." Torres found Dorn unsettling, but the man had worked at the lighthouse for years without incident. His job was lonely and isolated, which might explain his strange comments and nervous behavior around other people. In 1988, a documentary crew arrived from Los Angeles to film a segment about unsolved mysteries. They interviewed Torres, Maple, and several townspeople for a television show called America's Hidden Secrets. The episode aired on a Thursday night in November, reaching millions of viewers across the country. The show's host, a serious man with silver hair, stood at Devil's Tooth Cliff as he told Cora's story. "Officer Cordelia Blackwood vanished without a trace on this very spot," he said, the ocean wind-whipping his tie. 11 years later, her family and community refused to give up hope. "If you have any information about this case, please call the number on your screen." The phone lines at the Moonrise Bay Police Department rang constantly for 3 days. Tips came in from as far away as Alaska and Florida. A woman in Texas was sure she had seen Cora working at a diner in Dallas. A man in Oregon claimed he had information about a serial killer who targeted female police officers. Torres and his small team followed up on every lead, no matter how unlikely. None of them led anywhere, but the attention brought something unexpected. Other families dealing with missing loved ones began reaching out to Maple. Letters arrived weekly from parents, siblings, and children who were searching for someone we had lost. They found comfort in Maple's determination and strength. She started a support group that met monthly at the library, bringing together people who understood the unique pain of not knowing what happened to someone they loved. "The not knowing is the hardest part," said Ellen Martinez, whose teenage daughter had disappeared from a shopping mall in 1983. "At least with Maple, we can talk to someone who really understands." The support group became one of the most important things in Maple's life. Helping other families gave her purpose beyond just searching for Cora. It made her feel like her sister's disappearance, horrible as it was, had led to something meaningful. Mrs. Chen, now in her 70s, still lived in Moonrise Bay, but rarely spoke about the night Cora disappeared. Her memory of that evening remained cloudy, though she sometimes called the police claiming she had remembered something new. Each time, her story was slightly different from the last. "I think I saw a truck," she told Torres in 1987. "Or maybe it was a boat. There were lights. Definitely lights." 2 years later, she was certain she had seen Cora talking to a tall man with pale eyes. By 1990, she insisted that multiple people had been at her diner that night, though she couldn't describe any of them clearly. Torres was gentle with the elderly woman, but her changing stories only added to the mystery rather than solving it. Jimmy Morse, the gas station attendant who had been one of the last people to see Cora alive, developed a drinking problem that grew worse each year. He often sat at Murphy's Tavern, telling anyone who would listen about how he should have done more that night. "She told me she felt like someone was watching her," he would mumble into his beer. "Maybe if I'd asked her to stay, have another cup of coffee, talk about it more, maybe she'd still be here." The bartender, Sean Murphy, had heard the story hundreds of times but never interrupted. The whole town carried guilt about Cora's disappearance, but Jimmy Morse seemed to carry more than most. Tourism in Moonrise Bay had actually increased over the years, partly because of Cora's story. A small resort opened near the cliffs in 1987, and guests often asked to see Devil's Tooth Cliff, where the mysterious disappearance had occurred. Some locals found this disrespectful, but Maple saw it differently. "The more people who know about this place, the more chance someone might remember something important," she told the new resort manager. "Maybe someone who was here that night will finally come forward." Every October 15th brought reporters and curiosity seekers to Moonrise Bay. The anniversary had become an unofficial day of remembrance, with Maple placing flowers at the cliff and giving interviews to anyone who asked. Some years, she spoke hopefully about new leads or renewed investigations. Other years, she simply asked people to remember that Cora had been a real person, someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone who had dreams and plans, and people who loved her. She wanted to make detectives someday, Maple told a reporter in 1989. She was studying criminal justice in her spare time, taking correspondence courses. Cora believed that education made you a better officer. Chief Torres retired his predecessor's tradition of reading Cora's name at the annual police memorial service. Every May, when they honored officers who had died in the line of duty, he would add her name to the list, even though her death had never been confirmed. "Officer Cordelia Blackwood, badge number 247, he would say as the small crowd stood in silence. "Missing in action, October 15th, 1977. Still serving, still remembered, still missed." By 1990, 13 years had passed since Cora's disappearance. Maple was now older than her sister had been when she vanished. The thought bothered her sometimes. She was living a life that Cora would never get to experience. But she had also created something beautiful from tragedy. The memorial corner at the library had inspired similar displays in other towns. The support group had helped dozens of families cope with their loss. And the story of Officer Cordelia Blackwood had become a symbol of community strength and the power of never giving up hope. As Maple walked to work each morning, passing the harbor, where fishing boats prepared for another day at sea, she often thought about the ocean and its secrets. The water that had hidden Cora's fate for so long was the same water that brought life to their town, fish for their restaurants, tourists for the economy, beauty for the soul. Perhaps someday it would also bring answers. The ocean, after all, always returned what it had taken. Sometimes it just took longer than anyone expected. March 15, 1990. The Weather Service had been tracking the storm for 3 days as it moved up the California coast. Hurricane-force winds, they said. Waves up to 60 feet high. The worst storm to hit Moonrise Bay in 50 years. Chief Ray Torres stood in the police station at 2 a.m., watching rain slam against the windows like handfuls of gravel. The power had been flickering on and off for 2 hours. Emergency generators hummed in the basement, keeping the radios and computers running. "Bridge Street is flooded," reported Officer Danny Reeves over the radio. "Water's up to the streetlights." "Copy that, Danny. Stay safe out there," Torres replied. At 26, Danny was one of his youngest officers, but also one of his most reliable. He had joined the force 2 years ago, fresh from the police academy, full of energy and determination that reminded Torres of himself at the Dodge. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing. Torres had lived through many storms, but this one felt different, angrier, like nature itself was trying to tear Moonrise Bay apart and start over. At the library, Maple Blackwood watched from a second-story window as debris flew through the air. A garbage can tumbled down Main Street like a bowling ball. A stop sign bent so far in the wind that it touched the ground. "I've never seen anything like this," whispered Beth Connor, the young librarian who had started working there 6 months ago. At 23, Beth was fascinated by Cora's story and had spent hours reading through the Memorial Corner materials. "The storm of 1932 was supposed to be worse," Maple replied, but her voice was uncertain. "At least, that's what the old-timers always said." Through the rain-streaked window, they could see the harbor. Fishing boats strained against their moorings, some already broken free and drifting toward the rocks. The old wooden pier, built in 1952, swayed back and forth like a dance partner with no rhythm. "Look at the waves!" Beth gasped. Beyond the harbor, the ocean had become a wall of moving water. Waves 30, 40, 50 feet high marched toward shore in endless ranks. Each one crashed against the cliffs with a sound like thunder, sending spray 200 feet into the air. "It's like the ocean is angry," Beth whispered. Maple felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold rain. For 13 years, she had looked at that ocean and wondered what secrets it held. Tonight, it seemed like those secrets were fighting to get out. The worst of the storm hit at 4 a.m. Wind gusts reached 90 miles per hour, strong enough to flip cars and tear roofs off houses. The old pier finally gave up its fight against the waves, collapsing into the churning water with a groan that could be heard over the storm. But the most dramatic change happened at Devil's Tooth Cliff. For centuries, the jagged rock formation had stood unchanged, battered by countless storms but never broken. Local legends said it was solid stone all the way through, carved by ancient glaciers and hardened by time. The legends were wrong. Wave after wave pounded the cliff with incredible force. Each impact shook the ground like Asmal earthquake. Tons of water hit the rocks every few seconds, pressures that no natural formation could withstand forever. At 5:47 a.m., just as the worst of the storm was passing, something gave way. Captain Wade Finnegan was the first to notice it. The old fisherman had been awake all night, watching from his cottage as the storm destroyed half the harbor. When dawn finally broke through the clouds, he stepped outside to survey the damage. His boat was gone, torn from its moorings and probably smashed against the rocks miles down the coast. 3 other vessels had suffered the same fate. The harbor looked like a war zone, covered in broken wood and tangled rope. But it was Devil's Tooth Cliff that made him grab his radio with shaking hands. "Chief Torres," he called, his voice tight with excitement. "You need to get down to Devil's Tooth Cliff, right now." Torres was exhausted after 18 hours of coordinating emergency response, but something in Wade's voice made him pay attention. "What's the situation, Wade?" "The cliff. It's different. The storm opened something up. You need to see this." 20 minutes later, Torres stood beside Wade at the edge of Devil's Tooth Cliff, staring at something that shouldn't exist, where solid rock had stood for thousands of years. The storm had carved away part of the cliff face. A gash about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide had been torn open, revealing a dark hollow space beyond. "How is that possible?" Torres muttered, shining his flashlight into the opening. The cave mouth was partially filled with sand and debris washed up by the storm, but there was definitely a chamber inside. The sound of waves echoed from within, suggesting the cave connected to the ocean below. "I've lived here 72 years, Wade said, his voice full of wonder. "Never knew there was a cave in that cliff." Torres felt his heart begin to race. A hidden cave at Devil's Tooth Cliff, revealed after 13 years, the same spot where Cora had disappeared. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Wade, I need you to keep people away from here," Torres said. "This could be dangerous." But even as he spoke, he could see people gathering. Word was already spreading through the storm-battered town. Mrs. Patterson from the bakery was walking down the coastal road, her coat whipping in the wind. The high school principal, Mr. Davis, was driving up in his pickup truck. By noon, despite the ongoing cleanup efforts from the storm, dozens of people had gathered at Devil's Tooth Cliff. The cave opening drew them like a magnet, this mysterious hollow that had been hidden for so long. Maple arrived at 12:30, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread she hadn't felt in years. Beth came with her, along with several members of the missing persons support group. Could she be? Maple started to ask, then stopped. She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. "We don't know anything yet," Torres said gently, but his own voice betrayed his excitement. After 13 years of dead ends and false leads, they finally had something new to investigate. The fire department arrived with ropes and safety equipment. Chief Torres had called in experts from the county search and rescue team. If they were going to explore this cave, they would do it right. Officer Danny Reeves volunteered to be the first one down. He was young, athletic, and had some experience with rock climbing from his college days. "Be careful," Torres warned as Danny clipped into the safety harness. "We don't know how stable that opening is." Danny rappelled into the cave opening, his helmet light cutting through the darkness. His voice echoed back up to the waiting crowd. "There's a chamber down here. Bigger than it looks from up there." Then, after a few minutes of silence that felt like hours, "Chief, you need to see this." Torres descended into the cave, his pulse hammering in his ears. The chamber was indeed larger than expected, about the size of a living room, with smooth walls carved by centuries of wave action during high tides. But it was what lay scattered across the sandy floor that stopped his breath. Pieces of metal, corroded by salt water but still recognizable. Fragments of dark blue fabric. And there, half buried in the sand, something that glinted gold in the beam of his flashlight. Torres moved closer, his hands trembling as he brushed sand away from the object. It was a police badge, tarnished but unmistakable. Badge number 247. "Danny." Torres called, his voice barely a whisper. "Get everyone back from the edge. This is now a crime scene." Above them, the crowd waited in tense silence. Maple stood closest to the opening, her hands clenched into fists. She knew somehow that her 13-year wait was finally over, not because they had found Cora, not yet, but because they had found the first real clue since that terrible October night. The storm had given them what 13 years of searching could not: a place to look. And in the depths of that hidden cave, other secrets waited to be discovered. Secrets that would change everything the people of Moonrise Bay thought they knew about their quiet coastal town. The ocean had indeed returned what it had taken. But as Torres would soon discover, Cora's badge was only the beginning of what the cave would reveal. Hidden in the darkness below, evidence of other disappearances, other victims, other families who had been waiting just as long for answers. The storm had not just opened a cave, it had opened a door to the truth. March 16, 1990. The excavation of the hidden cave became the most important investigation in Moonrise Bay's history. FBI forensics experts arrived from San Francisco within hours of Torres's call. Geologists came from the State University. Marine archaeologists drove down from Oregon. The cave, they quickly determined, was a natural formation created by centuries of wave action during extreme high tides. But the entrance had been sealed by a rockfall sometime in their recent past. Based on the debris pattern and weathering, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the lead archaeologist, this cave was accessible from the outside until the late 1970s. Then rocks fell and sealed the entrance completely. Chief Torres felt his pulse quicken. Late 1970s, right around the time Cora disappeared. So someone could have used this cave before it was sealed? He asked. Absolutely, Dr. Chen replied. During low tide, the cave would be completely dry. During high tide, water would flow in but not fill the chamber completely. It would be the perfect hiding place. The careful excavation revealed much more than just Cora's badge. As the team sifted through layers of sand and debris, they found pieces of her police radio, fragments of her dark blue uniform, and personal items that made Maple cry. A silver locket their grandmother had given Cora for her 18th birthday, and a small notebook where she wrote poetry. But there were other things, too. Items that didn't belong to a police officer from 1977. On the third day of excavation, Dr. Chen's brush uncovered something that made everyone stop working. An old leather journal, its pages yellow and brittle but still readable. The handwriting was shaky, desperate. Day 12. The tide comes higher each time. Food almost gone. Sarah won't wake up much anymore. I can hear them up there sometimes, looking for us. If anyone finds this, we didn't run away. We were brought here against our will. The journal was dated September 1962 and signed M. Patterson, Chief. Torres immediately checked the old missing persons files. Mary Patterson, age 16, had disappeared in September 1962, along with her friend Sarah Kim, age 15. At the time, police assumed they were runaways who had fled to San Francisco to join the hippie movement. They weren't runaways, Torres told Maple that evening as they stood outside the police station. They were prisoners. The cave investigation revealed more journals, more personal items spanning decades. A man's wallet from 1955 containing the driver's license of James Wheeler, a child's toy from 1969, Asmal stuffed bear belonging to 8-year-old Tommy Vance, who had vanished during a family camping trip, a woman's purse from 1981 with the ID of Nina Vasquez, a tourist who had disappeared while hiking alone. Someone was using this cave as a prison, FBI agent Linda Morrison explained to the gathered investigators. The entrance was hidden from above, accessible only by boat during low tide. Victims were brought here and left to... She didn't finish the sentence. Everyone understood what she meant. The most chilling discovery came on day 10 of the excavation. Dr. Chen's team found something carved into the cave wall, hidden behind a pile of stones that had clearly been placed there recently. CB, Oct. 1977. He said no one would ever find us here. He was wrong. MB 1990. Maple gasped when she saw the carving. MB, those are my initials, but I didn't. I've never been in this cave. The handwriting analysis confirmed what everyone suspected, but no one wanted to say out loud. The carving had been made within the last few months. The tool marks were fresh, the letters sharp and clear. Someone else has been in this cave since the storm, Agent Morrison stated grimly. Someone who knew about Cora, knew about the investigation, knew about you. The revelation sent chills through the investigation team. If someone had carved Maple's initials in the cave, it meant they were still out there, still watching. still playing games with the Blackwood family. Security was immediately increased around Maple and the other key witnesses. Chief Torres assigned 2 officers to patrol her street around the clock. Agent Morrison gave her a panic button to carry at all times. "Whoever did this has been watching our investigation," Morrison warned. "They know we found the cave. They might try to eliminate witnesses." But the most terrifying discovery was yet to come. On the final day of the cave excavation, Dr. Chen's team found a small metal box buried deep in the sand near the back wall. Inside were dozens of photographs, Polaroids taken over many years. The photos showed surveillance images of people at Devil's Tooth Cliff, but they weren't crime scene photos. They were pictures taken from a distance, showing people who had no idea they were being watched. There were photos of the search parties. In 1977, looking for Cora. Photos of Maple placing flowers at the cliff every October 15th for the past 13 years. Photos of Chief Torres walking alone near the edge, lost in thought about the case that had consumed his career. And most disturbing of all, recent photos. Pictures of Maple at the library, of Torres at the police station, of the documentary crew that had visited in 1988. Someone had been documenting the investigation for years. The last photo in the box had been taken just days before the storm. It showed Maple standing at her apartment window, unaware that someone with a telephoto lens was capturing her every move from the woods behind her building. On the back, written in the same handwriting as the cave carving, "Soon." That night, Maple couldn't sleep. She kept checking her locks, peering through her curtains at the trees where someone might be hiding. The thought that she had been watched for years, photographed without her knowledge, made her feel sick and violated. Chief Torres called an emergency meeting with the FBI team. "We're not just investigating a cold case anymore," he told them. "We're hunting an active predator who has been operating in this town for at least 30 years. Agent Morrison spread the photographs across the conference table like pieces of a puzzle. "Look at the pattern. This person doesn't just kill and disappear. They stick around. They watch the aftermath. They enjoy seeing the pain they've caused. A serial killer who feeds on the suffering of the families left behind," added Agent Kim, the behavioral specialist. "That's why the bodies were never found. Taking them was only part of the game. Watching the community search and grieve was the real reward." The realization that their grief had been entertainment for a monster made everyone in the room feel sick. For 13 years, while they had mourned and searched and hoped, someone had been watching them with satisfaction. But the investigation also revealed something that gave them hope. Hidden among the photographs were images that the killer probably didn't realize were incriminating. Reflections in windows showing parts of vehicles, shadows that might indicate height and build, background details that could help identify the location where the photos were taken. "He's been careful, but not perfect," Agent Morrison observed. "These photos are evidence. They'll help us catch him." The cave excavation officially ended after 2 weeks, but the real investigation was just beginning. The FBI set up a permanent task force in Moonrise Bay, turning the old community center into a command post. Tip lines were established. Rewards were offered. The story made national news, bringing attention from across the country. But somewhere, in Moonrise Bay, the person who had turned their quiet town into his personal hunting ground was still free, still watching, still planning. The cave had revealed his crimes, but it had also revealed something else. He wasn't finished. The carving, with Maple's initials, wasn't just a taunt. It was a promise. And promises, as the people of Moonrise Bay were about to learn, were meant to be kept. As Chief Torres locked up the police station that night, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Scratched into the paint beside the front door, so fresh it was still bright against the faded surface, were 2 simple letters: MB. The hunter had come out of hiding, and his next target was clear: April 15, 1990. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source: Old Mrs. Chen from the diner, now 78 and living at Sunset Manor Nursing Home. Beth Connor, the young librarian, visited Mrs. Chen every Tuesday, reading newspaper stories aloud to residents who could no longer see well enough to read themselves. When she read the article about the cave discovery and the photographs, Mrs. Chen suddenly gripped Beth's hand with surprising strength. "The lighthouse man," she whispered, her cloudy eyes suddenly bright with memory. "I remember now. That night when the lady cop came to my diner, I saw the lighthouse man struck." "What lighthouse man?" Beth asked gently. "Ezra Dorn. He's been the lighthouse keeper for, 30 years, maybe more. His truck was parked behind my diner that night. I thought it was strange because the lighthouse is miles away." Beth's heart started racing. She had heard Chief Torres mention the lighthouse keeper before, an odd, quiet man who rarely came into town. "Are you sure it was his truck?" Beth asked. "Old blue pickup, dented on the left side. I know that truck. Ezra came to my diner sometimes, always sat in the back corner, never talked to anyone. That night, his truck was there, but he never came inside for help." Beth immediately called Chief Torres. Within an hour, he was at the nursing home with Agent Morrison, both trying to stay calm while Mrs. Chen's memory seemed clearer than it had been in years. "I was taking out the trash around 11:30, Mrs. Chen explained. "Ezra's truck was parked in the shadows behind my building. I thought maybe he was having car trouble, but when I looked again later, it was gone, and I never saw him come inside." Chief Torres felt his heart racing. Ezra Dorn had been the lighthouse keeper at Beacon Point since 1960. His job required him to live alone in the isolated lighthouse, maintaining the equipment and keeping ships safe from the rocky coastline. It was the perfect cover for someone who needed privacy and isolation. He would have known every inch of this coastline, Agent Morrison realized, including hidden caves that could only be reached by boat. Within hours, they had obtained a warrant to search the lighthouse. The old stone tower sat on a rocky point, 2 miles north of Devil's Tooth Cliff, connected to the mainland by a narrow causeway that flooded during high tide. As their cars approached the lighthouse, Chief Torres felt a chill. He had driven past this place hundreds of times over the years, never suspecting that a monster lived inside. Ezra Dorn, now 68 years old, greeted them at the lighthouse door with surprising calm. He was a tall, thin man with wild gray hair and eyes like winter fog. His clothes were old but clean, his hands rough from years of manual work. "I've been expecting you," he said simply, stepping aside to let them enter. Inside the lighthouse, they found what looked like a normal home, at first glance. Furniture that had seen better days, shelves lined with books about the ocean and navigation, a small kitchen with dishes neatly stacked, but Agent Morrison's trained eye caught details that others might miss. The windows were covered with heavy curtains. Maps of the coastline covered one wall, with caves and tide schedules marked in careful handwriting. And there was something else, a faint smell of chemicals like the developing solution used for photographs. "Mr. Dorn," Agent Morrison said carefully, "we'd like to ask you some questions about the night officer Blackwood disappeared." Dorn nodded and sat down in his worn armchair. "I remember that night. Terrible storm coming in. I was worried about ships getting too close to the rocks." "Did you leave the lighthouse that evening?" "Oh, yes. I often patrol the coastline during storms. Part of my job, you understand, making sure no one gets into trouble." Chief Torres exchanged glances with Agent Morrison. Dorn's casual admission that he had been out that night was almost too easy. "Where exactly did you patrol?" Morrison asked. "Up and down the coast. Devil's Tooth Cliff, the harbor, anywhere people might be in danger." Dorn's voice was flat, emotionless, as if he were discussing the weather. "Did you see Officer Blackwood that night?" For the first time, Dorn's expression changed slightly. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Beautiful woman, dedicated to her job. I admired that about her. The way he spoke about Cora in the past tense, with that strange smile, made Torres want to grab him by the throat. But he forced himself to stay professional. "Mr. Dorn, we have a warrant to search these premises." "Of course you do," Dorn said calmly. "You'll find what you're looking for in the room upstairs." The room upstairs turned out to be a house of horrors disguised as a photographer's darkroom. Every wall was covered with photographs, hundreds of them, dating back decades. Pictures of people at Devil's Tooth Cliff, at the beaches, walking through town, always taken from a distance, always without the subject's knowledge. There were detailed maps of the coastline with every cave, marked and labeled, tide charts going back 30 years, journals filled with meticulous records of weather patterns, moon phases, and the daily routines of Moonrise Bay residents. But the most chilling discovery was a collection of personal items, arranged like trophies on a series of shelves. Jewelry, driver's licenses, car keys, and pieces of clothing. Each item was carefully labeled with a name and date. Mary Patterson, Sept 15, 1962. James Wheeler, Aug 3, 1969. Tommy Vance, July 12, 1969. Cordelia Blackwood, Oct 15, 1977. Nina Vasquez, May 20th, 1981. The list went on. 15 names spanning 28 years. "Where are the bodies?" Chief Torres demanded when they brought Dorn back upstairs. Dorn sat calmly in his chair, hands folded in his lap. "The ocean takes care of everything eventually. That's what I learned in my first year here. The ocean is hungry, and it never gives back what it swallows." Agent Morrison pressed him for details, but Dorn seemed to exist in his own reality, speaking about his victims as if he were discussing a gardening project. "They served a purpose," he explained matter-of-factly. "Someone has to tend the coast. Someone has to decide who belongs and who doesn't. I've been the guardian of these waters for 30 years. "Guardian?" Torres spat. "You're a murderer." Dorn looked genuinely puzzled by the anger in Torres's voice. "I protected this place, removed the elements that didn't belong. The troublemakers, the disrespectful ones, the ones who threatened the peace of the waters." The psychological evaluation later would describe Ezra Dorn as a delusional psychopath who believed he was protecting the coastline by eliminating people he deemed unworthy. His victims were usually women traveling alone, teenagers he considered disrespectful, or anyone who showed what he called improper attitudes toward the ocean. His method was always the same: approach victims when they were isolated, claim their Wasan emergency or offer help, then subdue them and transport them by boat to whatever cave he was using as a prison at the time. When they died, from exposure, dehydration, or despair, he would dump their bodies into the deepest part of the ocean during high tide. Officer Blackwood was different, he admitted during questioning. "She fought harder than the others. Took her almost 3 days to die in the cave. Most only lasted 1 or 2 days." The casual cruelty of his words made Chief Torres leave the room before he did something he would regret. But even with Dorn in custody, troubling questions remained. During his confession, he mentioned details that didn't add up with the physical evidence. "How did you move Officer Blackwood's patrol car to the cliff?" Agent Morrison asked. "I didn't," Dorn replied. "My helper took care of that." "Your helper?" "I was never alone in this work. The town has many people who understand the importance of keeping the waters pure." When pressed for details about this accomplice, Dorn just smiled and refused to say more. The investigation revealed that Dorn couldn't have acted entirely alone in some of his crimes. Moving a police car would have required help. Covering up 15 disappearances over 30 years would have needed someone with access to official records and investigations. Someone in the department helped him, Torres realized with growing horror. Someone with the authority to bury evidence and misdirect investigations. The revelation that there might be a corrupt police officer, someone Torres worked with every day, sent shockwaves through the department and the community. As Chief Torres reviewed decades of case files that night, he began to see a disturbing pattern. Tips about the lighthouse area were never followed up properly. Witnesses who mentioned seeing Dorn's truck were never re-interviewed. Evidence that might have pointed toward the lighthouse keeper somehow disappeared from files or was marked as inconclusive. Someone's been protecting him, Torres told Agent Morrison. For 30 years, someone with a badge has been helping a serial killer. The nightmare wasn't over. In fact, it was about to get much worse. Because somewhere in Moonrise Bay, Dorn's accomplice knew that their decades of secrets were about to be exposed. And desperate people do desperate things to protect themselves. April 16, 1990, the investigation into Dorn's possible accomplice became Chief Torres's worst nightmare. He spent sleepless nights in his office, reviewing every case file from the past 30 years, looking for patterns of interference or cover-ups. What he found made him physically sick. In 1962, when Mary Patterson and Sarah Kim disappeared, the IUA investigating officer wrote in his report that he had checked with the lighthouse keeper, who saw nothing unusual that night. But there was no record of anyone actually visiting the lighthouse or interviewing Dorn. In 1969, when James Wheeler vanished while camping near the coast, a witness reported seeing a truck matching Dorn's vehicle in the area. The follow-up report stated, "Lighthouse keeper checked and alibied, was performing maintenance during time in question." But the maintenance logs from the lighthouse for that period were missing. Case after case showed the same disturbing pattern. Potential leads involving the lighthouse keeper were quickly dismissed. Witnesses who mentioned seeing Dorn's truck were never re-interviewed. Physical evidence somehow disappeared from storage rooms. Whoever was helping him had access to everything, Torres told Agent Morrison during one of their late-night strategy sessions. Evidence lockers, witness statements, even the ability to alter official reports. The most damning evidence came from Cora's own case. Deep in a misfiled folder, Torres found a witness statement he had never seen before. A teenager named Kevin Walsh had reported seeing a man matching Dorn's description near Devil's Tooth Cliff on the night Cora disappeared. The statement was dated October 16, 1977, the day after Cora vanished. But it had never been entered into the main case file, never investigated, never even mentioned in any reports Torres had access to. At the bottom of the statement, there was a handwritten note, "Witness unreliable, known drug user, file and forget, DH." DH Deputy Harold Finch, who had been Torres's mentor when he first joined the force. Finch, who had been the lead detective on most of the missing persons cases over the years. Finch, who had retired in 1985 and moved to Arizona, claiming he needed the dry climate for his health. Torres felt like the world was collapsing around him. Harold Finch had been like a father to him, teaching him everything about detective work, about serving the community, about never giving up on a case. Harold Finch, who had trained him to believe that finding the truth was the most important thing a police officer could do. "I need Harold Finch's address in Arizona," Torres told his secretary, trying to keep his voice steady. The phone call happened at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. Torres sat alone in his office, staring at the phone for 20 minutes, before he found the courage to dial. "Ray, good to hear from you, son," came Finch's familiar voice from Tucson. "I heard about the cave discovery on the news. Amazing what that storm uncovered. Harold, I need to ask you about some old cases." "Sure thing. My memory's not what it used to be, but I'll try to help." Torres took a deep breath. "I found Kevin Walsh's witness statement, the one you buried." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly a minute. Torres could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. "Harold? Are you there? I'm here." Finch's voice had changed completely. Older, more tired, full of something that sounded like relief. "I was wondering when someone would finally piece it together." "Why?" Torres asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You have to understand, Ray. It wasn't supposed to go on so long. When I first found out what Ezra was doing, back in '62, I was young and stupid. He had photographs of me with a woman who wasn't my wife. My career would have been over, my marriage destroyed. Torres felt sick. So you covered for a murderer. At first, I just buried one report. I told myself it was a one-time thing, that he would stop. But he didn't stop. And by then, he had more than photographs. He had evidence that I'd covered up a murder. I was trapped. 15 people, Harold. 15 people died because you were too much of a coward to face your mistakes. You think I don't know that? Finch's voice cracked with emotion. You think I've had a single peaceful night's sleep in the last 28 years? Every time I buried evidence, every time I misdirected an investigation, I told myself it would be the last time. But it never was. No, it never was. Ezra was smart, careful. He made sure I was implicated in everything. If he went down, I went down with him. Torres gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. Officer Cordelia Blackwood was my partner. She was my friend. I know. I'm sorry, Ray. I'm so damned sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back 15 people. No, it doesn't. Torres arranged for Arizona authorities to arrest Finch, but by the time they reached his retirement apartment the next morning, they found him dead, of an apparent drug overdose. On his kitchen table was a handwritten confession, 23 pages detailing 30 years of cover-ups and the crushing guilt that had finally become too much to bear. The confession filled in the missing pieces of the puzzle. Finch described how Dorn would call him after each murder, providing just enough details to make Finch an accessory if the truth ever came out. How Finch had learned to redirect investigations, lose evidence, and discredit witnesses who got too close to the truth. He controlled me completely, Finch wrote. I became his puppet, dancing to protect a secret that grew more monstrous with each passing year. I told myself I was protecting my family, my career, my reputation, but really I was just protecting my own cowardice. But the confession also revealed something that chilled investigators to the bone. Dorn had been planning something much bigger, for years, something that would have made his previous crimes look small by comparison. He talked about a final project, Finch wrote, something he called the Great Cleansing. He said the cave was just the beginning, that he had plans for a much larger operation. I never got full details, but he mentioned other locations, other helpers, a way to expand his work beyond just Moonrise Bay. The revelation that Dorn might have been building a network of killers sent federal investigators scrambling. They searched every property Dorn had access to, every contact he'd made over the years, every location that might hide more victims or evidence of a larger conspiracy. What they found at an abandoned fish processing plant 5 miles south of town made national headlines. Hidden in the basement were detailed plans for what Dorn called the final harvest, a scheme to kidnap multiple victims at once and hold them in various locations along the coast. His target list included prominent townspeople, tourists, and anyone who had shown interest in the old missing persons cases. Maple Blackwood's name was at the top of the list, circled in red ink 3 times. He was planning to finish what he started with your family, Agent Morrison told Maple when they showed her the documents. The storm and the cave discovery forced him to move faster than he wanted. The evidence suggested that Dorn had been preparing for his final harvest for months, stockpiling supplies and identifying multiple holding locations. His arrest had likely prevented what could have been the worst mass kidnapping in California history. But even with Dorn in custody and Finch dead, troubling questions remained. The fish processing plant documents mentioned other associates and fellow guardians of the coast. Had Dorn recruited other people to his twisted cause? Were there more Harold Finches out there, protecting killers for their own selfish reasons? We may have cut off the head of the snake, Agent Morrison told Chief Torres, but we don't know how many other serpents are still hiding in the grass. The investigation expanded to include other coastal towns, other missing persons cases that might have been connected to Dorn's network. Tips poured in from across the state as families wondered if their own missing loved ones might have been victims of the lighthouse killer, as the media had dubbed him. For Torres, the revelation about Harold Finch was almost harder to bear than Dorn's crimes. He could understand how someone like Dorn, clearly mentally ill and delusional, could commit such terrible acts. But Finch had been a good man who made one bad choice and then spent 30 years making worse choices to cover it up. How many other cops like Finch are out there? Torres wondered aloud to his wife one evening. How many other departments have someone who's willing to look the other way when convenient? The scandal rocked law enforcement across California. Police departments implemented new oversight procedures. Internal affairs divisions were strengthened. The Moonrise Bay protocols became standard training for recognizing and preventing corruption. But for the people of Moonrise Bay, the hardest truth was yet to come. They had spent 30 years living in fear of a monster they couldn't see, never knowing that two of their most trusted protectors were the very people enabling the horror. The betrayal cut deeper than the original crimes. Dorn was clearly insane, but Finch had been one of them, a neighbor, a fellow citizen, someone they had trusted to keep them safe. As Torres stood in the empty police station late one night, looking at Harold Finch's old desk, he made a promise to himself and to the memory of Cordelia Blackwood. Never again would he let personal loyalty override professional duty. Never again would he assume that someone wearing a badge was automatically trustworthy. And never again would he allow the culture of silence that had protected a killer for 30 years to take root in his department. The badge, after all, was just a piece of metal. It was the person wearing it that determined whether it stood for justice or became a shield for corruption. And in Moonrise Bay, they had learned that lesson in the most painful way possible. May 15, 1990. The final answers came from Ezra Dorn himself, but only after he realized his twisted game was truly over. Facing multiple murder charges and a certain death sentence, Dorn made a deal with prosecutors. In exchange for life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, he would reveal the locations where he had disposed of his victims' bodies. The ocean has hiding places that no one knows about, he told investigators during his first cooperation session. Deep pools where the current creates underwater whirlpools. Nothing that goes down there ever comes back up. Over 3 weeks in May, Dorn led diving teams to various locations along the coast. His memory for underwater geography was eerily precise, even after decades. 30 feet out from the red rocks, where the water turns dark blue, he would say, pointing from the boat. There's a shelf that drops straight down. Mary and Sarah are there. The first location yielded the remains of Mary Patterson and Sarah Kim, the teenage friends who had disappeared in 1962. Their bodies, preserved by the cold, deep water and unique mineral content of the underwater cave system, were finally returned to their families for proper burial. At the second location, they found James Wheeler, the camper who had vanished in 1969. The third dive recovered Nina Vasquez, the tourist who had disappeared in 1981. But it was when they asked about Cora that Dorn's demeanor changed completely. Officer Blackwood was different, he told the diving team leader, his voice taking on an almost reverent tone. She fought too hard, lasted too long in the cave. I respected her for that. Chief Torres, who was observing the interview, felt his jaw clench. The idea that this monster had respected Cora made him want to leap across the table. Where did you put her? Torres demanded. Dorn looked directly at him, and for the first time since his arrest, his expression seemed almost human. I didn't put her in the deep pools. She earned better than that. He led them to a shallow underwater grove near Devil's Tooth Cliff, where centuries of wave action had carved natural stone shelves into the sea floor. 20 feet down in the stone garden, Dorn said quietly. I laid her to rest properly. She deserved that much. The divers found Cordelia Blackwood exactly where Dorn said she would be. Her body, still in her police uniform, lay in a natural stone alcove beneath the waves. The cold water and unique conditions had preserved her remarkably well. Around her body, Dorn had arranged stones in a careful pattern, almost like a shrine. Her service weapon was placed in her hands, not as she would have held it in life, but arranged posthumously in what Dorn apparently considered a position of honor. She died fighting, Dorn told Chief Torres later when they brought him back to the station. Even trapped in that cave, even knowing she was going to die, she never stopped trying to find a way out. I've never seen courage like that. The twisted respect in his voice made Torres feel sick, but he forced himself to listen. After 13 years, he needed to know everything. She talked about her sister constantly, Dorn continued. Said Maple would never stop looking for her. She was right about that. I watched that girl for years, placing flowers, asking questions, never giving up. Such determination. Why didn't you kill Maple too? Torres asked, hating himself for the question but needing to understand. Dorn looked genuinely puzzled. Kill her? She wasn't a threat to the coast. She was a guardian, like me, keeping her sister's memory alive, making sure people remembered. I respected that. The revelation that Dorn had been watching Maple not as a predator but as some kind of twisted, kindred spirit was almost worse than if he had simply wanted her dead. The idea that their grief had been observed and approved of by a monster was deeply disturbing, but there was one more piece of the puzzle that Dorn was reluctant to reveal. During his final interrogation session, Agent Morrison pressed him about his helper, the person who had moved Cora's patrol car to make her disappearance look like an accident. Harold Finch helped you cover up the investigations, Morrison said. But he couldn't have physically moved that police car. Who was your accomplice that night? Dorn was quiet for a long time, staring at his shackled hands. Finally, he spoke. Jimmy Morse. The name hit Torres like a physical blow. Jimmy Morse, the gas station attendant who had been one of the last people to see Cora alive. Jimmy, who had seemed so helpful during the initial investigation, so full of regret about not doing more to help her. Jimmy was perfect, Dorn explained, matter-of-factly. He worked nights, knew everyone's routines, could tell me when people would be alone and vulnerable, and he had problems, mental problems, easy to control. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Jimmy Morse had been feeding information to Dorn for years, learning the patterns of potential victims, identifying when they would be most vulnerable. He had been the one to tell Dorn that Cora felt like she was being watched. He had been the one to help move her patrol car, making it look like she had driven off the cliff by accident. A statewide manhunt was issued for Jimmy Morse, but it was too late. His gas station had been closed for a week, with a hastily written "for sale" sign in the window. His house was empty, cleared out in obvious haste. Neighbors said he saw a moving truck last Tuesday, reported Officer Danny Reeves. Jimmy told him he was moving to Oregon to be near his sister. But there was no sister in Oregon. Jimmy Morse had vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed him whole. A deeper investigation into Morse revealed a history of mental illness dating back to his teens, along with several arrests for stalking and voyeurism in the 1970s. More disturbing, his work schedule at the gas station had given him perfect knowledge of who was traveling through town and when they would be most isolated. The manhunt for Jimmy Morse became a federal case, with his photograph distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country. But he was never found. Some investigators believed he had changed his identity and disappeared into the criminal underground. Others thought he might have become another victim of Dorn's twisted sense of justice, disposed of when he was no longer useful. The truth about Jimmy Morse became the final mystery of the Cordelia Blackwood case, a loose thread that would never be tied up completely. But for the people of Moonrise Bay, Cora's homecoming represented something more important than perfect justice. It represented the power of love to overcome darkness, the strength of a community that refused to give up, and the triumph of truth over deception. Cora's body was returned to Moonrise Bay on May 15, 1990, 13 years to the day after the storm had revealed the hidden cave. The funeral she never had finally took place, with hundreds of people attending. Police officers from departments across California came to pay their respects to the woman who had died doing her duty. Chief Torres delivered the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about Cora's dedication, her courage, and the 13-year search that had finally brought her home. Officer Cordelia Blackwood never gave up, he told the assembled crowd. Even in her final moments, trapped and alone, she kept fighting. She fought for justice, for truth, and for the hope that someone would find her and bring her home. Maple spoke last, reading from one of the poems they had found in Cora's notebook in the cave. The ocean keeps its secrets deep, but truth will rise like morning tide. Though darkness tries to make us weep, love's light will be our guide. Her voice wavered as she closed the notebook. My sister wrote this poem 3 days before she disappeared. She had no idea how prophetic it would be. The burial took place in Moonview Cemetery, overlooking the ocean that had both taken Cora and eventually given her back. Her headstone, paid for by donations from the community, read, Officer Cordelia Blackwood, Badge 247. She never stopped fighting. As the mourners gathered around the grave, a light fog rolled in from the ocean, gentle and peaceful, unlike the violent storm that had revealed the truth. It seemed fitting that Cora's final rest should be accompanied by the sea breeze she had known so well during her patrols. Ezra Dorn was sentenced to life in prison without parole, where he would spend his remaining years in a maximum security facility far from any ocean. He showed no remorse for his crimes, maintaining until the end that he had been protecting the coast from unworthy intruders. The case files were finally closed, but the impact of the investigation would be felt for years to come. The Moonrise Bay murders became a case study in law enforcement academies, teaching future officers about the importance of following every lead and the dangers of institutional corruption. And somewhere, Jimmy Morse remained free, carrying the secret of his role in 15 murders. Whether he was living under a new name or had met his own violent end would remain forever unknown. But for Maple Blackwood, standing at her sister's grave as the fog rolled gently over the headstones, the most important truth had been revealed. Cora had come home. The 13-year vigil was over. The ocean had kept its promise, returning what it had taken, bringing the truth to light like the morning tide. May 16, 1990, October 15, 1990. The months following Cora's funeral brought a strange peace to Moonrise Bay. For the first time in 13 years, the town could finally exhale. The mystery that had defined an entire generation was solved. The monster who had terrorized their community was behind bars. The truth had surfaced, just like Cora's poem had promised. But healing is never a simple process. Chief Ray Torres announced his early retirement 2 weeks after the funeral. At 53, he felt older than his years, worn down by the weight of the investigation and the betrayal of Harold Finch. I need to step away, he told the town council. This case, it changed me. I'm not sure I can be the kind of chief this department needs anymore. His replacement was Captain Lisa Moreau, a tough, experienced officer from the state police. At 38, she had built a reputation for cleaning up troubled departments and rebuilding community trust. We start fresh from today, she told the officers at her first department meeting. No more buried reports. No more looking the other way. No more protecting anyone just because they wear a badge. We answer to the community, and the community deserves the truth. She had Harold Finch's old desk removed from the building and replaced with a memorial corner for Officer Cordelia Blackwood. Cora's badge, number 247, was mounted in a frame alongside her photo and the poem Maple had read at the funeral. The lighthouse where Ezra Dorn had lived was converted into a memorial and museum. The Coast Guard installed an automated beacon, eliminating the need for a live-in keeper. The building itself became a place where visitors could learn about the victims and the long investigation that brought them justice. Maple worked closely with a team of volunteers to create displays honoring each of the 15 victims. She insisted that every person who died at Dorn's hands be remembered as more than just a statistic. Mary Patterson wanted to be a teacher, she explained to visitors, standing before a display case containing Mary's recovered diary. Sarah Kim was going to study medicine. James Wheeler was an artist who painted landscapes of the coast. They all had dreams, plans, people who loved them. The museum became a place of pilgrimage for families of missing persons from across the country. People came seeking hope, comfort, and sometimes just the knowledge that someone else understood their pain. Mrs. Chen, despite her advanced age and failing memory, insisted on volunteering at the museum twice a week. Her recollection of that terrible October night had helped break the case, and she seemed to find purpose in telling Cora's story to visitors. They were all somebody's child, she would tell guests, her voice still strong despite her 80 years. All somebody's hope and dream. When we remember them, we keep them alive. The anniversary of Cora's disappearance, October 15th, was officially designated as a day of remembrance in Moonrise Bay. But instead of being a day of mourning, it became a celebration of community strength and the power of never giving up hope. The first anniversary after Cora's funeral drew hundreds of people to the memorial garden that had been created in the town square. 15 trees, one for each victim, were arranged in a circle around a central fountain. Each tree had a plaque with the victim's name, dates, and a brief description of who they were in life. Cora's tree was an oak that would grow strong and tall over the years. Her plaque read, Officer Cordelia Blackwood, 1949-1977. She served with courage, died with honor, and came home through love. But perhaps the most important healing happened in quiet, personal moments. Maple finally moved out of the small apartment, where she had spent 13 years obsessing over her sister's disappearance. She bought a cottage near the beach with large windows that faced the ocean. The view that had once filled her with dread now brought her peace. I used to think the ocean was my enemy, she told Beth Connor, who had become her closest friend. Now I understand it was just keeping Cora safe until we were ready to find her. Ray Torres, despite his retirement, remained in Moonrise Bay. He couldn't imagine living anywhere else. He bought a small house on Maple Street, the same street where Cora had lived, and spent his mornings walking the beach, collecting shells, and watching the waves. He also became a volunteer at the Memorial Museum, sharing his knowledge of the investigation with researchers and writers who came to study the case. More importantly, he became a mentor to young police officers, teaching them about the importance of persistence and integrity. The badge doesn't make you a good cop, he would tell them. Your character makes you a good cop. The badge just gives you the authority to act on it. The town's character had changed in subtle but important ways. People were more connected now, more aware of their neighbors. The trauma of discovering that monsters had been living among them for decades had made them more vigilant but also more compassionate. New safety measures were implemented throughout Moonrise Bay. The police department created a community watch program where neighbors looked out for each other. The harbor master began requiring all boat owners to register their vessels and report any unusual activity along the coast. But perhaps most importantly, the culture of silence that had allowed Dorn to operate for so long was completely broken. People spoke up when something seemed wrong. They asked questions when answers didn't make sense. They had learned that sometimes the cost of being polite was too high. Beth Connor started a support group for family members of violent crime victims, expanding on the work Maple had begun years earlier. The group met monthly at the library, providing a safe space for people to share their grief, their anger, and their hopes for healing. Trauma changes you, Beth would tell new members. But it doesn't have to define you. You can choose whether that change makes you bitter or makes you stronger. The national attention from the case brought unexpected benefits to Moonrise Bay. Tourism increased, but it was respectful tourism. People who came to learn about the investigation and to pay their respects at the memorial sites. A small inn opened near the Lighthouse Museum, run by the Martinez family who had moved to town specifically because of its reputation as a place where people looked out for each other. The inn's guest book filled with comments from visitors who felt the town's spirit of resilience and hope. "This place taught me that evil can hide anywhere," wrote one guest. "But it also taught me that good people will never stop fighting for justice." Danny Reeves, the young officer who had been first into the cave, was promoted to detective. At 28, he carried himself with a maturity beyond his years, shaped by his role in solving the case that had haunted the town for so long. "Chief, Torres taught me that police work isn't about glory or excitement," Danny told a reporter. "It's about patience, persistence, and caring more about the victims than about yourself." As October 15, 1990 approached, the 13th anniversary of Cora's disappearance, but the first since her body had been found, Maple prepared for a ceremony that would be different from all the others. Instead of placing flowers at Devil's Tooth Cliff and making promises to a sister who might never come home, she would be speaking at the Memorial Garden dedication, a place where people could come to remember not just Cora, but all the victims, and to celebrate the strength of a community that refused to give up. The night before the ceremony, Maple walked through the memorial garden alone. She touched each plaque, spoke each name, and thanked them for their patience in waiting to be found. When she reached Cora's oak tree, she didn't cry. For the first time in 13 years, she felt only gratitude. "You can rest now," she whispered to the young tree. "You fought so hard for so long. The truth came out, just like your poem said it would. Now it's time to rest." The ocean breeze carried her words across the town, past the Lighthouse Museum, over the police station where Captain Moreau was working late, and out to sea. It sounded almost like a sigh of relief, as if the very air of Moonrise Bay was finally at peace. The healing wasn't complete. It might never be complete, but it had begun. And sometimes beginning to heal is the most important victory of all. October 15th, 1990. October 15th, 2003. The Memorial Garden dedication on October 15th, 1990, drew hundreds of people to Moonrise Bay. Families of the victims traveled from across the country to attend. News crews documented the ceremony, but respectfully, focusing on healing rather than sensationalism. Maple stood at the podium in the town square, looking out at faces both familiar and new. At 35, she had found a strength she never knew she possessed. 13 years ago, my sister Cordelia Blackwood disappeared while doing the job she loved, protecting this community, she began, her voice steady and clear. "We searched for her in the water, in the hills, in every corner of this town. We never found her because we were looking in the wrong places." She paused, looking at Cora's oak tree, already showing new growth despite being planted just months earlier. Cora wasn't lost in the darkness. She was waiting in the light, waiting for us to become the kind of community that doesn't give up, that doesn't accept easy answers, that fights for justice even when it takes 13 years. The crowd listened in respectful silence as Maple continued. "Today, we dedicate this garden not just to remember the dead, but to celebrate the living. Every person who searched, who hoped, who refused to let these cases be forgotten. You are the real heroes of this story." The ceremony concluded with the planting of one final tree, a young redwood sapling that would grow to tower over all the others. Its plaque read simply, "For those still searching." As the years passed, the Memorial Garden became a beacon of hope for families dealing with missing loved ones. The Moonrise Bay model, combining persistent investigation with unwavering community support, was studied by law enforcement agencies nationwide. Maple completed her degree in criminal justice through correspondence courses and became a victim's advocate, helping other families navigate the complex emotions and legal challenges of missing persons cases. She never married, dedicating her life to honoring her sister's memory through service to others. "Every family deserves answers," she would tell the grieving parents and siblings who saw their help. "Sometimes those answers take time to surface, but they're worth waiting for." Ray Torres, despite his retirement, became an unofficial consultant on cold cases throughout California. His patient, methodical approach to investigation, learned through years of searching for Cora, helped solve dozens of cases that had seemed hopeless. Young detectives would come to Moonrise Bay to learn from the man who had never given a pawn. Officer Blackwood. Torres would take them to the Memorial Garden, to the Lighthouse Museum, and finally to the police station where Cora's badge still hung in its place of honor. "Police work isn't about being the smartest person in the room," he would tell them. "It's about caring enough to keep looking when everyone else has moved on." The Lighthouse Museum expanded over the years, becoming a center for research into criminal psychology and community resilience. Dr. Sarah Chen, the archaeologist who had led the cave excavation, established a program that trained investigators in the use of archaeological techniques for criminal investigations. "Every crime scene tells a story," she would explain to her students. "Sometimes that story is buried for decades, but the truth is always there, waiting to be uncovered." Most importantly, the culture of transparency that emerged from the Cordelia Blackwood case became permanently woven into Moonrise Bay's identity. The annual Day of Remembrance evolved into a broader celebration of community vigilance and mutual support. Captain Lisa Moreau, now Chief Moreau, made sure that new officers understood the department's history. Cora's story was part of their training, along with Harold Finch's cautionary tale about the dangers of corruption. "We serve the community, not ourselves," she would tell each new recruit. "The moment you forget that, you become part of the problem instead of part of the solution." In 1995, Jimmy Morse was finally found, not by law enforcement, but by a construction crew in Portland, Oregon. His body was discovered in the foundation of a building under demolition, where it had been hidden for at least 3 years. A note, found in his jacket pocket, written in his shaky handwriting, confessed to his role in Cora's murder and begged forgiveness from the Blackwood family. "I was sick in my head, but that's no excuse. I helped him hurt good people. I'm sorry. Tell Maple, I'm sorry, JM." The discovery brought closure to the final chapter of the case, but by then, Moonrise Bay had moved beyond the need for perfect justice. The community had learned that healing comes not from revenge, but from remembrance and positive action. Chiwareta 2000, the FBI designated the Cordelia Blackwood investigation as a model case study, highlighting how community persistence and interagency cooperation could solve even the most complex cold cases. The case files were used to train federal agents in the importance of following every lead and maintaining communication with victim families. By 2003, 13 years after Cora's body was found, Moonrise Bay looked like a completely different place. The population had grown from 8,000 to nearly 15,000, drawn by the area's reputation as a community where people genuinely looked out for each other. The economy had diversified beyond fishing and tourism to include technology companies and research institutions. But the Memorial Garden remained the heart of the community, a place where residents and visitors alike could reflect on the power of persistence and love. On any given day, you could find people sitting quietly among the 15 trees, reading the plaques, drawing strength from the stories of ordinary people who had faced extraordinary circumstances. Maple, now 48, still visited the garden every morning before work. She no longer came to mourn, but to remember and to draw inspiration for her ongoing work with families in crisis. On the morning of October 15, 2003, the 26th anniversary of Cora's disappearance, She found something unexpected at the base of Cora's oak tree. A small bouquet of wildflowers tied with a yellow ribbon. Attached was a note written in a child's careful handwriting. "Thank you for keeping us safe. Love, Emma, age 8. Maple looked around but saw no one nearby. She didn't need to know who Emma was or how she had learned Cora's story. The message was clear. A new generation was growing up in Moonrise Bay. Children who understood that their safety had been bought with courage and sacrifice. These children played in parks that had been redesigned with better lighting and emergency call boxes. They attended schools with safety protocols developed in response to the lessons learned from the Dorn case. They lived in a community that valued truth over comfort, justice over convenience. They were Cora's legacy, the promise that had been kept. That evening, Maple hosted her annual gathering for the original investigators and searchers. The group was smaller now. Some had moved away, others had passed on. But the bonds forged during those dark 13 years remained strong. Ray Torres, now 73, but still sharp, raised his glass of wine as he had every year since 1990. "To Cora," he said simply. "To Cora," the others echoed, but Maple added something more, as she did every year. "And to the promise we made and the promise we kept, to the truth that surfaced like the morning tide, to the love that guided us home, outside, the Pacific Ocean, waves rolled against the shore in their eternal rhythm. The sound no longer carried the weight of secrets or the echo of unanswered questions. It was simply the ocean, beautiful, powerful, and peaceful." The lighthouse beam swept across the water, as it had for decades, but now it was fully automated, monitored remotely by the Coast Guard. No keeper was needed. No one lived alone in that tower anymore. In the memorial garden, 15 trees stood sentinel under the stars, their branches reaching upward like prayers finally answered. The fountain at their center reflected the lighthouse beam, creating ripples of light that danced across the water. At the center of it all, Cora's oak tree had grown strong and tall, its roots deep in the soil of a community that had never forgotten her sacrifice. A bronze plaque at its base caught the moonlight, displaying the words that had become Moonrise Bay's unofficial motto: "She never stopped fighting." The story of Officer Cordelia Blackwood had become larger than one person's tragedy. It had become the story of Moonrise Bay itself, a community that faced its darkest hour and chose to become better, stronger, more vigilant in protecting each other. The promise had been kept. The truth had been revealed. The healing had begun and continued, generation after generation. And in the rustle of oak leaves in the ocean breeze, if you listened carefully on quiet nights, you could almost hear a whisper of gratitude, not from the past, but from the future. From all the people who would live safely because 15 victims had finally found their voice, because one sister never gave up hope, and because a community learned that some promises are too important to break. The tide had returned what was taken. The truth had risen like the morning light. And love had been their guide, just as Cora's poem had promised it would be. That's the incredible true story of Officer Cordelia Blackwood and the 13-year search that changed Moonrise Bay forever. Sometimes the ocean keeps its secrets, but love and determination can bring even the deepest truths to light. Where are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments below. I love connecting with listeners from around the world. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to help us spread more stories of courage and kindness. Your support means everything. And don't miss the amazing story waiting for you on screen right now. Click and keep the inspiration going. Until next time, remember, some promises are too important to break.